I never thought I'd spend a weekend stacking cinder blocks like some medieval mason preparing for a siege, but apparently suburban life has that effect. And if you're wondering how a pretty quiet, drama-free homeowner like myself ended up transforming an ordinary front yard into Fort Petty, let me introduce you to the one, the only, the myth that roams homeowners associations everywhere, HOA Karen. Now, I need you to understand, I was not the type of guy who caused neighborhood problems. If you poll my friends, they'd probably call me boring. Solid guy, pays bills on time, alphabetizes his spice rack for fun. That's me. No wild backyard parties. No rusty cars up on blocks. In fact, I had practically mastered suburban compliance on expert difficulty. I cut my lawn like a golf course and even alternated mowing patterns just to keep things crisp. I wasn't a rule breaker. Until the hedges. Ah yes, the hedges. My modest pride and joy. A neat row of glossy shrubs that lined the front of my yard like a gentle green wall. They weren't large, barely hip height, and I kept them trimmed so often my scissors could have applied for frequent fly miles. To me, the hedges weren't an issue. They were the finishing touch between my house and the street. But to one woman 3 houses down, they were apparently the horticultural equivalent of Godzilla stomping through Tokyo. Karen declared them an eyesore and unnaturally towering. Towering. Again, they were hip height. The only living thing visibly offended by them was a neighbor's chihuahua, a tiny gremlin of a dog that barked at them daily as if they had murdered its ancestors. The thing about Karen, however, is that she doesn't operate on logic. Karen runs on a private frequency only heard by KO spirits. Where the rest of us might see a 2-inch overgrowth, Karen sees barbarism against community harmony. So one Tuesday, while I was at work earning an honest living and not scheming about shrub conspiracies, Karen made her play. With the full blessing of the HOA board, she swooped in and had the entire hedge line forcibly removed. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, groceries still in the backseat, I was met not with a wall of green but with raw stumps, shredded, pitiful, like props from a zombie apocalypse film. At first I thought blight, or maybe disease. Then, like a Bond villain surveying her triumph, Karen appeared with folded arms and a smirk big enough to be outlawed. "Oh, you're welcome," she sang from the sidewalk. "Now your yard finally matches community standards." Community standards. Those words tasted like vinegar. What did I do? Well, I smiled. The kind of smile where your mouth moves but your brain is already plotting. I carried my groceries inside, sat at the kitchen table, stared into the void for a good 10 minutes, and made my choice. Because in moments like this, the universe offers 2 paths: surrender quietly to tyranny, or rise, fueled by spite, and engineer chaos. And thus began the Fortress Project. That Saturday, while Karen likely drafted her latest HOA memo about illegal wind chimes, I rolled into Home Depot on a mission. 1 cart, filled with cinder blocks. Then another cart. Then a third, until the cashier looked at me like I was either starting a militant doomsday sect or building a very committed pizza oven. I grinned. Just property improvements. Which wasn't technically a lie. Now here's a comedy. I am no builder. My mechanical skill ends at Googling how to fix a leaky faucet, and then calling a professional when I inevitably break it more. But skill wasn't the point. This was about persistence. About sending a message. Every block I hefted was another word in a petty suburban sonnet. The first row was basic, almost polite. 1 neat layer where the hedges once stood. To a stranger, it looked like yard edging. Nothing dramatic. But Karen saw. She always sees. Like a bat drawn to the faintest vibrations of nonconformity, she arrived mid-afternoon, squinting. "What's this?" she demanded. "Oh, just a hedge replacement. Something neat. Something clean." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh," she hated that answer. By Sunday the wall was 3 rows high, a waist-tall barricade that screamed Middle Ages chic. I put down my tools, sat in a lawn chair behind it, sipped lemonade, and felt a piece deeper than yoga. Hedgegate might have hurt, but Fortress Petty was balm for the soul. Of course, it couldn't last. Monday morning, as I headed for wake, Karen intercepted me clutching her holy text, the HOA rulebook. "This is not in compliance," she snapped, flashing a grainy iPad photo of my rising stronghold. I examined the page. It says here, shrubs or foliage above regulated height. These aren't shrubs. They're blocks. Entirely different kingdom if you're into biology. I swear steam came out her ears. And so, war. She filed complaint after complaint. Meanwhile, my wall grew. I reinforced it, topped it with decorative stones. My friends joined in. One donated a flagpole, so I proudly flew a stitch banner declaring the fortress's true name, Fort Petty. Another added solar lights, and suddenly by night it glowed like an enchanted ruin from a fantasy novel. Little by little, I realized the fortress wasn't just mine. It was becoming community theater. Neighbors whispered their approval when Karen wasn't around. Kids on bikes rode past yelling, "Castle Guy." The mailman leaned on it to enjoy shade. Halloween rolled through and parents took photos of their dressed-up kids in front of the glowing battlements. Even the Chihuahua stopped barking and instead gazed with suspicion that may well have been reluctant respect. Karen, however, unraveled. She tried to draft amendments specifically banning masonry walls, but the HOA board, perhaps sensing the villagers were having too much fun with Castle Petty, voted her down. She cycled between yelling, glaring, and silently seething. By the time the wall reached shoulder height, she had stopped confronting me altogether. She resorted only to dagger glaze from the sidewalk, while from my chair inside the fortress, sipping morning coffee, I was entirely invisible unless I chose to pop up like a smug prairie dog. It wasn't just privacy. It was joy. Building something stubbornly ridiculous, knowing it twisted the one person determined to ruin my peace, felt like justice. Petty justice, written in stone. Months passed. Fort Petty stayed. It became a neighborhood landmark. Christmas rolled around, and I strung little fairy lights along the parapets. Kids used it as a backdrop for snowball fights. Delivery drivers laughed when marking packages for the castle house. As for me, I took my peace back one block at a time, until the whole wall stood not just as protection, but as proof. Proof that sometimes when life, or Karen, tears down your hedges, the loudest response isn't anger, but construction supplies. So yes, the hedges were gone, but in their place stood something stronger, funnier, and infinitely more annoying to my nemesis, a fortress of pettiness. And every time Karen marched past, clutching her sacred HOA papers like medieval scrolls, I raised my coffee cup high above the battlements in silent salute. To victory, to spite, to Fort Petty, the cinder block castle born of small-town drama, but maintained with stubborn, brick-by-brick pride.